The European Union has set stringent measures that require coffee farmers in Uganda to prove that their produce was grown in an area that is free from deforestation. Now, the regulation, as the EU sees it, is aimed at stopping widespread deforestation and the environmental damage that comes along with that. And this often happens when land is cleared to grow crops like coffee, cocoa, palm oil, soy, among others. Uganda is a top coffee exporter in Africa, but most of its coffee tends to be exported straight into the European market. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria telling us why farmers there are concerned.
Ugandan coffee farmers are racing against time to have their beans meet EU standards. The EU market will reject any coffee grown in areas that had trees felled. Farms affected are those that were planted since 2021. Officials from the government agency Uganda Coffee Development Authority are now tracing the coffee value chain and registering farmers to ensure compliance.
For us to know that you are complying to deforestation, all the land that you have where coffee is has to be, the geolocations must be picked. So when you pick these geolocations, I think there is going to be another integration with another system that we will use, that use satellite images to see whether this area has been deforested to plant coffee.
In Uganda, most of the coffee is grown in the highlands in the east and south of the country and in the lowlands in the center. The highlands have faced deforestation as farmers struggle to expand planting fields.
As a country, we can be prepared to comply so that we can have access to that market. Because you know very well that about 73% of the coffee exports of Uganda, 73% go to the European countries. So that market is still big. We don't want to lose it.
The strict standards will also require coffee-producing countries to meet standards on the international market. The EU market is a lucrative one and Uganda is working hard to maintain it. But there is uncertainty on how much coffee will make it to the market and whether it will affect Uganda's coffee exports negatively. Coffee is Uganda's leading agriculture export crop, and the country is investing in practices and technologies to maintain quality.
The EU market, the market in Asia, demand for quality. So any research efforts or research support towards ensuring that we have volumes of good quality coffee on a sustainable basis is really going to transform this country.
For the past 5 years, the EU has offered financial support worth about $9 million to the coffee and cocoa sector in Uganda to help improve quality and market access. Uganda exported coffee worth $950 million in the year ending November, up from $880 million in the previous year. The challenge is to sustain production while meeting the set new standards. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Let's dive into the details of this story. Lispa Ndungu is the acting chief executive officer of the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. She's joining us on the line from the Kenyan capital. Thank you very much for your time this evening. So, from the perspective of Kenyan farmers who produce, almost 50,000 metric tons of coffee every year, how difficult will it be for them to comply with the traceability requirements of this law?
Thank you so much for your question. Looking at the trading information available for the Kenyan coffee farmers, presently we have information up to the factory level, the cooperative societies, and the coffee estates. However, you would say that those are groupings that are made up of about 800,000 Kenyan coffee farmers whose point information geographically that we require. Now, stakeholders have done their own due diligence and are saying that it could cost around $10 to $4 per farmer just to get this information. And of course, that is very prohibitive to the growers. And I'm sure that places some level of difficulty in terms of complying to the EU deforestation regulations.
Who ultimately bears the cost of this compliance? Is it the farmer who bears it? Is it the cooperative who pays the cost? I'm just trying to make sense of where this cost ends up in the value chain.
If you look at the regulations, they somewhat place the responsibility on the operator, who in this case could be a person or an organization whose business includes exporting agricultural produce to the European Union markets. That said, I'm sure stakeholders have also expressed their concerns that this cost should not be borne by the growers directly or indirectly, because this could disincentivize the business for them.
Indeed, and we'll get to the disincentivization angle a little later. But I'm just trying to get a little more granular onto the verification angle, because on one hand you could say, yes, we've got access to a lot more available satellite imagery that could tell us, this specific area is growing coffee, these are the boundaries where we know it has been grown, and therefore deforestation may or may not have happened. But beyond that, even that by itself, the satellite imagery, is it an effective tool to determine the provenance of the coffee that's coming into the market? Because what's to stop, coffee from places that are grown from deforested areas from mingling in with other produce?
The key point here that would be able to help determine that is traceability. If you look at the regulations, they're very clear that there is a cutoff point for when that land should be not deforested, if I could put it that way. And looking at the age of coffee plants and the traceability information that's available, you can actually be able to tell that this coffee has been grown in land that was previously deforested within the last 3 years or within the last 5 years, meaning that we are somewhere in terms of having data that could be helpful in tracing that coffee if it was in deforested or forested areas previously.
We're also seeing reports that some European coffee firms like Alois Delima Cafe, they're also considering exiting Ethiopia right next door in response to this law, because they're finding it difficult to essentially impose these sort of verification requirements. Are you seeing anything similar or comparable in the Kenyan market?
Not so far. We've not seen any coffee farms outrightly saying that they are going to boycott this market because of that. However, there is a quiet worry from the stakeholders that if this data is not available, it could lead to lack of possible information that could help in traceability. And thus, actually, the stakeholders are trying to look for support to ensure that they have the last mile data on traceability, and that is the GPRS information, the polygons, so that that doesn't happen.
Essentially, that would sort of incentivize this coffee to move into other markets with less stringent requirements, like the United States, for example, which took in a fair bit of coffee last year.
Right, looking at that, statistics have shown us that about 55% Kenyan coffee goes to the European market. This goes to say that the European market pays a competitive price for Kenyan coffee, and this is demand driven because Kenyan coffee is actually good quality coffee. Lots of that market, yes.
Yeah,
Lots
please
of
go
that
ahead.
market to less stringent markets, so to put it, could mean that there could be reduced prices for the growers and thus reduced revenues over time. And this could be a disincentive, of course, because it could lead to farmers even looking for maybe presently forested areas to increase their acreage so that they're able to, increase their margins. And this could worsen this deforestation issue. However, that said, the EU market is duty-free Kenyan coffee. And that is one of the incentives for staying in this coffee, unlike other markets, which charge tariffs for coffee marketing. So I'm sure farmers would really like to move towards complying so that they can keep their European Union market.
One last question for you. I'm just looking at where coffee futures are at the moment, up around 5.8% at the moment. I believe this is in York ice-related futures, over $202, or give or take. Do you think the implementation of this law might essentially trigger or rather push prices up, at least in the short term, as suppliers sort of figure out where they're going to how they're going to reconfigure the supply chains and who will bear the cost of this verification?
Absolutely, I think so, because just the normal rules of supply and demand, where the supply diminishes and demand is constant, the price goes up. So I believe so, yeah.